####. Chapter 1. A different kind of spark. The world had shrunk to the size of a single, ugly truth. It was a truth spoken from the mouth of a skeletal giant, a truth that had taken Izuku Midoriya's 14 years of hope and incinerated them in a puff of steam. He stood on the grimy rooftop, the wind whipping his green-black hair across his face, but he didn't feel the chill. He felt nothing but a hollow, cavernous ache in the center of his chest, a void where a dream used to live. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic. The words echoed, a merciless mantra replaying in his mind. All Might, his idol, the symbol of peace, the man whose smile had been the sun in Izuku's sky, had looked at him with pity, not with anger, not with annoyance, but with the quiet, soul-crushing pity one reserved for a lost cause. Izuku's feet moved on autopilot, carrying him down the echoing stairwell and back onto the bustling streets. The city was a riot of color and noise, a vibrant tapestry of quirks and action. A woman floated a bag of groceries to her second-story apartment window. A man with rock-like skin directed traffic with effortless authority. A child sneezed and a shower of harmless blue sparks erupted, making his mother laugh. Quirks were the very fabric of their reality, the air they breathed. And Izuku was a vacuum in the heart of it all. His hand trembled as he clutched the strap of his yellow backpack. Inside, his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, felt like a lead weight. Its pages were soaked and warped, the ink bleeding into abstract, meaningless blotches. The cover, once a proud declaration of his ambition, was now a charred ruin, signed by the very hero who had just signed the death warrant for his dream. He traced the blackened edges of the autograph with his thumb. All Might had signed it out of habit, a reflex. It meant nothing. A signature on a tombstone. He took a detour, avoiding the main thoroughfares, his path taking him through a labyrinth of narrow back alleys. The smell of damp concrete and overflowing dumpsters filled his nostrils. He wanted to be small. He wanted to be invisible. He wanted the world that had just told him he was worthless to forget he existed. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. He could hear his mother's voice from a decade ago, her tears falling onto his hair as she held him in front of the computer screen. The doctor's diagnosis, quirkless, had been the first crack in his world. All Might's words were the final, shattering blow. He had spent 10 years trying to glue the pieces back together with sheer willpower, with meticulous analysis, with a desperate, burning faith that heart could triumph over genetics. He had been a fool. He stopped walking, leaning his forehead against the cold brick wall. The rough texture bit into his skin. Tears he hadn't realized were gathering finally spilled over, hot and shameful, tracing paths through the grime on his cheeks. Why? He whispered to the uncaring bricks. What did I do wrong? Was it wrong to want to help people? Was it wrong to see someone in trouble and feel that frantic, undeniable urge to do something? Was his heart defective because it wasn't connected to a supernatural power? All Might had said pro-heroes were always laying their lives on the line. Izuku had been willing to do that. He would have gladly thrown his useless, quirkless body in front of danger if it meant saving even one person. But it wasn't enough. His body wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a shield. It was just a body. Breakable, fragile, useless. A distant explosion boomed, rattling a loose windowpane nearby. Izuku flinched, but didn't look up. Another villain attack. Another chance for heroes to shine. Another reminder of the world he was forever locked out of. The pros will handle it, he thought, the thought laced with a new and bitter venom. It's not my problem anymore. I can't make it my problem. He pushed himself off the wall and started walking again, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He just wanted to go home. He wanted to crawl into bed and maybe, if he was lucky, not wake up for a week. He would have to tell his mom. He'd have to look into her worried eyes and tell her that he was giving up, that she was right to be sorry, that her son was a hopeless case. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, sharper than any before it. As he turned a corner, he saw the source of the commotion. A crowd had gathered at the mouth of a shopping district alleyway, their phones held high, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. Smoke billowed into the sky. Izuku's feet slowed, his analyst's curiosity warring with his newfound despair. He could hear the panicked shouts of heroes. Kamui Woods was there, but the terrain was wrong. Empty Lady couldn't fit. Backdraft was trying to control the fires, but his water was only making the ground slick. Then he saw it, the same amorphous, writhing creature of green sludge that had attacked him less than an hour ago. A cold dread, sharp and personal, seized him. A villain All Might had captured. A villain who had escaped because Izuku had foolishly clung to the hero's leg, distracting him. This is my fault. The thought was an electric shock. The despair in his chest was suddenly joined by a nauseating wave of guilt. He pushed through the edge of the crowd, his shorter stature forcing him to peer between shoulders. The villain had a hostage. A middle school uniform, spiky blonde hair, the familiar, furious popping of explosions. Kaken! The name was a choked whisper. Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the explosive embodiment of everything Izuku could never be, was being suffocated. He was fighting, of course he was. He was always fighting. His hands blasted explosions in every direction, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts, but they did nothing to the liquid monster engulfing him. His face, visible for a brief, horrifying moment, was a mask of panic and rage. His eyes, usually so full of arrogant fire, were wide with genuine terror. He was drowning. The heroes were helpless. The crowd was watching. And Izuku stood there, frozen. I'm quirkless. I can't do anything. You have to be realistic. Stay back. It's too dangerous. The voices of reason, of his mother, of All Might, of his own broken spirit, screamed at him to stay put. He was a liability. He would only get in the way. He would get himself killed. But then, his eyes met Bakugo's. For a single, timeless second, across the chaos and the smoke, their gazes locked. In that crimson stare, Izuku saw past the bully, past the arrogance, past the years of cruel nicknames and casual violence. He saw a kid. A terrified kid who was going to die. And he saw something else, a plea. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't gestured, but it was there in the frantic desperation of his eyes. Help me, something inside Izuku Midoriya snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a complete and total system failure of his sense of self-preservation. His legs, which had been rooted to the spot by despair, were suddenly pistons of motion. He burst through the police line before anyone could react. You idiot! Get back here! A hero yelled. He didn't hear it. The world narrowed to a tunnel, the end of which was Bakugo. His mind, the analytical engine that he had honed for a decade, went utterly blank. There was no plan. There was no strategy. There was only a single, screaming imperative that drowned out everything else. Save him. His backpack felt heavy. In a moment of pure, unthinking instinct, he swung it off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might at the villain. The yellow bag sailed through the air and struck the sludge monster in one of its massive eyes. It was a pathetic, meaningless gesture. The villain barely flinched, but the bag burst open. Textbooks, pencils, and one very special, very burnt notebook tumbled out. The corner of a ruler poked the villain's eye, causing it to roar in annoyance. For a fraction of a second, the crushing grip on Bakugo's mouth loosened. Kaken! Izuku screamed, his legs still pumping, closing the distance. Bakugo gasped, pulling in a desperate, ragged breath of air. Deku? What the hell are you? I couldn't just stand there and watch you die! Izuku shrieked, his voice cracking with tears and adrenaline. He reached the monster, his small hands clawing uselessly at the viscous sludge. It was like trying to dig through thick, sticky tar. It was hopeless. Absolutely, utterly hopeless. He was going to die here. For nothing. The sludge villain laughed, a gurgling, horrible sound. A new meat shield! You're a real hero, kid! A tendril of sludge shot out, aiming for Izuku's face. This was it. His short, pathetic, quirkless life was over. He would die a failure, a fool who had accomplished nothing but getting in the way. He squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, All Might. But beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, that one, single imperative remained, burning hotter and brighter than anything else. It was no longer just a thought. It was his entire being. I have to save him. The need was so pure, so absolute, it transcended thought and became a physical force. It was the crystallized essence of every heroic dream he'd ever had, every notebook he'd ever filled, every time he'd ever yearned to reach out a helping hand. It was the desperate prayer of a boy who had nothing left but his own heroic spirit. And something answered. It started as a warmth in the hollow of his chest, a flicker in the void. In a nanosecond, it became a furnace. A sensation unlike anything he had ever known bloomed from his sternum, a feeling of immense pressure and brilliant clarity. It felt like a lock, rusted shut for 14 years, had just been blown open. A sound filled his head, not a sound heard with his ears, but with his very soul. It was the pure, resonant chime of a cosmic tuning fork, a single, perfect note of creation. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He screamed, not in terror, but as an involuntary release of the impossible energy building inside him. I have to save him! A cataclysm of golden light erupted from his body. It wasn't an explosion like Bakugo's. It had no heat, no concussive force that threw debris. It was a wave of pure, tangible luminescence. It burst from his chest in a silent, breathtaking shockwave, pushing outward in a perfect dome. The light was the color of the sun at its zenith, impossibly bright yet not blinding. It was solid. The tendril of sludge heading for Izuku's face disintegrated, not by burning, but by being forcibly broken down, its fluid form momentarily petrified by the light before shattering into inert, dusty particles. The main body of the villain recoiled as if struck by a physical blow, its gelatinous form shuddering violently. The light wave washed over it, and wherever it touched, the sludge solidified, turning from a viscous liquid into a brittle, crystalline substance. For a fleeting moment, as the light pulsed at its absolute peak, an intricate pattern of glowing golden lines, like a divine circuit board or the delicate cracks in a piece of kintsugi pottery, blazed across Izuku's skin. It traced the veins in his arms, webbed across his chest, and spiraled out from his heart before vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The light wave expanded, washing over the alley. It didn't harm the buildings or the watching heroes. It simply was. A profound, undeniable presence. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, collapsing back into Izuku's chest with a final, silent pulse that left the world seeming dim and gray in its absence. Izuku fell to his knees, gasping. The world spun. His body felt like it had run 100 marathons at once. Every muscle screamed, and a splitting headache pounded behind his eyes. The sludge villain, now partially fossilized and thrown back several feet by the force, let out a confused, pained gurgle. The shock had been so profound that its grip on Bakugo had completely failed. Freed, Bakugo collapsed to the ground, coughing and sputtering, his lungs burning. He stared at Izuku, his eyes wide, his usual rage completely replaced by shell-shocked disbelief. The moment of stunned silence was broken by a deafening roar. "I am here!" All Might, in his magnificent muscle form, landed between the boys and the villain. He had been in the crowd, fighting his time limit, ashamed of his own weakness. He had seen Izuku run. He had seen the pathetic backpack throw. And then he had seen the miracle. He had seen the light. "Texas Smash!" he bellowed, his fist connecting with the now brittle villain. The monster didn't just splatter. It shattered like glass, the remaining liquid parts atomized by the sheer force. The sky, which had been gray with smoke, was cleared by the wind pressure, and then it began to rain. The ordeal was over. The aftermath was a blur of noise and confusion. The pro-heroes, once they'd recovered from their shock, swarmed the scene. They praised All Might, collected the scattered remains of the villain, and then turned on Izuku. "What were you thinking, kid? That was incredibly reckless. You could have gotten yourself killed. And the hostage!" He was being scolded, but he barely heard them. He was on his hands and knees, trying to catch his breath, his body trembling with exhaustion. What was that? What had happened? He looked at his hands. They were just his hands, scarred and calloused, but ordinary. There was no glow, no residual power. Had he imagined it? No. The way the villain had recoiled, the look on Bakugo's face. "Hey!" The voice was rough, choked. Izuku looked up. Bakugo was standing over him, swaying slightly, his face pale beneath a layer of soot and sludge. His red eyes were wide, fixated on Izuku with an intensity that was unnerving. "Deku!" Bakugo growled, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell was that?" Izuku flinched back. "Kaken. Don't you kaken me!" he snarled, grabbing the front of Izuku's uniform. "That light! What was it? You've been holding out on me all this time, acting like a worthless, quirkless pebble, when you had a quirk like that hidden away?" The accusation was laced with a deep, raw sense of betrayal. It was easier for Bakugo to believe Izuku had been lying his entire life than to accept he'd been saved by the person he considered beneath him. "No! I swear, Kaken, I'm quirkless!" Izuku cried, his voice desperate. "I don't know what that was. It just happened!" Bakugo's eyes narrowed. He searched Izuku's face, looking for the lie. But all he saw was genuine, terrified confusion. It made no sense. It broke the rules of the world as he knew them. He shoved Izuku away in disgust and frustration. "Lying piece of crap," he muttered before allowing the paramedics to guide him away, his mind a whirlwind of anger and bewilderment. He had been weak. He had needed saving, and Deku had done something impossible. It was humiliating. It was infuriating. Izuku watched him go, the weight of the world settling back onto his shoulders. The heroes finished their scolding and left him to be checked over by a medic who found nothing wrong with him besides exhaustion and a few scrapes. He was just a footnote in the day's events. The official story would be that All Might had saved the day. The mysterious flash of light would be dismissed as a trick of the eye, a reflection off debris, anything but what it was. Because what was it? He had no answer. He gathered his scattered belongings, his hands shaking as he picked up the singed notebook. His signature was still there. A monument to his folly. Dejected, his temporary adrenaline forgotten and the bone-deep exhaustion setting in, he turned to finally make his way home. His dream was dead, and now he had a terrifying, inexplicable mystery to deal with on top of it all. It was too much. "Young man," Izuku froze. That voice. He turned, and there, blocking his path, was the skeletal, true form of Toshinori Yagi. All Might. His expression wasn't pitying this time. It was intense, searching, and deeply, profoundly serious. "We need to talk," All Might said, his voice quiet but firm. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He was going to be scolded again. He was going to be told how foolish he was, how he'd almost gotten himself killed, how he was a menace. He braced himself, his eyes glued to the pavement. They walked in silence to a more secluded park, the setting sun casting long shadows. All Might sat on a bench, letting out a weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. Izuku stood before him, head bowed, waiting for the verdict. "I came to scold you," All Might began, his voice raspy. Izuku flinched. "I was going to tell you that what you did was reckless and illogical. That you put yourself and the other boy in more danger. That's what a pro should say." He paused, and the silence stretched. Izuku risked a glance up. All Might was staring at his own hands, his expression conflicted. "But I can't," he continued, his voice softer. "Because the truth is, you weren't being illogical. You were being a hero." My body was frozen. I stood there in the crowd, a pathetic imitation of my own symbol, my time limit ticking away, and I did nothing. The other pros were paralyzed by circumstance. But you, a boy with no power, who had just had his dreams crushed by me, you ran in. He looked up, and his piercing blue eyes met Izuku's. "Your story is not what I thought it was," All Might said. "And I owe you an apology. I was wrong to tell you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. The proof is right here. The most heroic person at that scene today was you." Izuku's breath hitched. Tears sprang to his eyes, but these were different from the tears of despair on the rooftop. These were tears of stunned, disbelieving validation. "But that's not all." All Might leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. The casual mentor was gone, replaced by a man confronting a deep mystery. "Young man, what was that light?" The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Izuku's blood ran cold. It was real. All Might had seen it clearly. I don't know," Izuku stammered, the honest truth feeling like a lie. I swear, All Might. I'm quirkless. The doctor, my toe joint. I've never done anything like that before in my life. I thought I imagined it. You did not imagine it, All Might said, his voice certain. I saw it. It was like watching a star be born. It pushed the villain back. It felt solid. I've seen tens of thousands of quirks in my career, young Midoriya. I have never, ever seen anything like that. He saw the genuine terror and confusion in Izuku's eyes. This wasn't an act. The boy truly had no idea what he had just done. A new, startling possibility began to form in All Might's mind, displacing his original plan for a successor. One for all was a torch to be passed. But this felt different. This was a seed that had just broken through barren soil. I was going to tell you something else on that rooftop, All Might confessed, a trickle of blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. I was going to tell you my secret and offer you a chance to inherit my power. My quirk, one for all, can be passed on. Izuku's world, which had already been tilted on its axis, flipped completely upside down. He stared speechless, his mind unable to process the sheer magnitude of what he was hearing. Inherit All Might's power? The number one hero? But now, All Might said, a strange, thoughtful smile touching his lips. Now, I think fate has a different plan for you. It seems you have a power of your own, a deep and powerful one, slumbering inside you. One that only awoke when your spirit was pushed to its absolute limit. He stood up, towering over Izuku even in his withered form. He placed a bony, yet surprisingly strong, hand on Izuku's shoulder. I cannot offer you my quirk, young Midoriya. It would be like trying to pour water into a cup that is already filling with a spring of its own. Izuku's heart plummeted. For a fleeting second, he'd been offered the sun, only to have it snatched away. But I am making you a new offer, All Might said, his voice resonating with a new kind of purpose. He squeezed Izuku's shoulder, forcing the boy to look him in the eye. I don't know what that power is. I don't know its limits or its cost. But the spirit that summoned it, that is the spirit of a true hero. His gaze was electric, filled with a fire Izuku had only ever seen in his hero form. Let me help you understand it. Let me help you train your body, so it can withstand the strain of that light. Let me help you forge that unknown power into an instrument of heroism. All Might's smile returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the broad, public grin of the symbol of peace. It was the quiet, proud smile of a teacher who had just found his most promising student. Let me train you, young Midoriya. Let me help you become the hero you were born to be. For the second time that day, Izuku Midoriya's world shattered. But this time, it was not from the crushing weight of despair. This time, it shattered like a geode, the dull, gray exterior cracking open to reveal a core of impossible, brilliant, crystalline hope. Tears streamed freely down his face, washing away the dirt and the grime. They were not tears of sadness or of joy, but of a profound, overwhelming release. He had been seen. Not his quirklessness, not his weakness, but his soul. He fell to his knees again, but not in exhaustion. He bowed his head, unable to speak, and sobbed. All Might waited patiently, his hand still resting on Izuku's shoulder, a steadfast anchor in the storm of emotion. The sun had finally set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the twilight sky. After a long moment, Izuku managed to look up, his green eyes glowing with a fierce, renewed light in the gathering dark. He couldn't form the words. He couldn't say thank you, he couldn't say yes. The emotions were too big, too powerful. So he just nodded, a single, decisive motion that sealed his fate. In the heart of the boy who had been told he was nothing, a different kind of spark had ignited. It was not a borrowed flame. It was his own, and together they would learn to make it burn as brightly as the sun. Hashtag Chapter 2. Forging the First Light. The first week of training was a special kind of hell, one meticulously designed by the symbol of peace himself. It wasn't a hell of fire and brimstone, but of rust, rot, and lactic acid. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less a park and more a coastal landfill. For decades, ocean currents had conspired with human apathy to turn this once scenic stretch of sand into a graveyard for society's refuse. mountains of rusted appliances, tangled nests of fishing nets, skeletal car chassis, and generations of plastic waste formed a jagged, ugly skyline against the rising sun. This, All Might had declared with a cheerful grin that was utterly at odds with his skeletal form, was Izuku's new gym. To wield a great power, you must first forge a worthy vessel, Toshinori Yagi had announced on their first morning, gesturing to the landscape of trash. Your quirk, whatever it may be, seems to erupt from a place of immense willpower and emotion. Think of your spirit as a nuclear reactor, young Midoriya. Right now, your body is a glass jar. If you try to contain a nuclear reaction in a glass jar, it will shatter into a million pieces. We must rebuild you, turn you into a reinforced containment vessel of steel and concrete. The poetry was lost on Izuku as he spent the next several weeks learning the intimate geography of his own physical limits. His days became a grueling rhythm of hauling, lifting, and dragging. He learned the specific agony of muscles he never knew he had. His hands, accustomed to the smooth grip of a pen, were now a geography of blisters, calluses, and cuts. Every morning he'd wake up so stiff he felt like an old man, his body screaming in protest, only to be met by Toshinori's relentlessly optimistic presence and a new, color-coded section of the American Dream Plan timetable. Excellent work, my boy! Toshinori would call out from atop a discarded refrigerator, sipping a thermos of tea. Feel that burn? That is the sensation of weakness leaving the body. It is the foundry of your own personal hero's suit, forged from muscle and grit. Izuku, currently trying to dislodge a waterlogged sofa from the wet sand, could only manage a wheezing groan in response. He felt less like a hero in the making and more like a very tired, very sore pack mule. But as the weeks bled into the first month, a change began. The initial shock of agony subsided into a persistent, manageable ache. The sofa that had once been immovable, he could now drag 10 feet before collapsing. The tires he could barely roll were now something he could lift. He was still a scrawny kid, but beneath the surface, something was knitting together. Hardened muscle began to trace faint outlines on his arms and back. His stamina, once abysmal, was now merely poor. It was progress. The physical training, however, was only half of their mission. The other half was far more esoteric and infinitely more frustrating. All right, that's enough for today, Toshinori said one evening as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The tide was coming in, washing over the newly cleared patch of sand that was a testament to Izuku's labor. Let's move on to the main event. They retreated to a small, hidden cove at the far end of the beach, shielded from prying eyes by a high rock formation. This was their second gym, the laboratory for the unexplainable. Focus, Toshinori coached, his voice low and serious. Try to remember the feeling. The villain, the danger, young Bakugo's face, the desperation. Izuku sat cross-legged on the cool sand, his eyes closed. He'd been trying this every evening for 3 weeks, and the result was always the same, nothing. He would chase the memory, trying to recapture the lightning in the bottle. He'd picture the sludge villain's horrifying grin, feel the phantom sensation of helpless terror, scream the words asterisk. I have to save him! Asterisk in his mind until his head throbbed. He could feel his heart rate increase, his palms sweat. He could summon the fear. But the light refused to answer. It's not working, he gasped, opening his eyes. He slumped forward, his forehead touching his knees. Frustration coiled in his gut. I don't understand. I'm feeling it, the same desperation, the same fear. Why won't it come out? Toshinori watched him, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps you're chasing the wrong catalyst, my boy. Fear and desperation were the kindling, yes. But what was the spark? You didn't just feel fear for yourself, you felt a need to protect him. The emotion was directed outward, not inward, directed outward. The will to protect. Izuku's mind latched onto the concept. All this time, he'd been trying to replicate the negative stimuli, the terror, the helplessness. But that wasn't the core of it. The core was the action. The need. He closed his eyes again, but this time, he didn't think of the sludge villain. He pictured his mom, her face lined with worry, her tears from that day at the doctor's office. He imagined the danger approaching her, something he had to stop. A faint warmth stirred in his chest, a barely there flutter. It was more than he'd felt yet. He pushed harder. He pictured the other kids from his school, the ones who mocked him but who would be defenseless against a real villain. He felt a flicker of responsibility, a desire to stand in their way. The warmth grew, becoming a noticeable pinprick of heat. Then, his mind settled on the man sitting a few feet away from him. He pictured Toshinori, not as the invincible All Might, but as he was now, gaunt, frail, coughing up blood after overexerting himself. He pictured the wound on his side, the terrible injury that had hobbled the world's greatest hero. He imagined a threat, a looming shadow, coming for this kind, weary man who had placed all his faith in him. An intense, powerful surge of protectiveness flooded Izuku's heart. It wasn't a frantic, desperate need. It was a clear, sharp, and resolute vow. I will protect you. The warmth in his chest bloomed. He felt the hum, that same soul-deep resonant chime from the alleyway, though this time it was just a whisper. He opened his eyes. In the palm of his outstretched hand, a small, golden light flickered into existence. It was no bigger than a candle flame, sputtering and unstable, casting a warm, gentle glow on his face. It pulsed with his heartbeat, a living thing born of his will. Toshinori leaned forward, his eyes wide with awe. You did it, he breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. Izuku stared at the light, mesmerized. It felt warm. Not hot, but like holding a piece of the afternoon sun in his hand. It hummed with a subtle energy, a vibration he could feel in his bones. It felt like a part of him, an extension of his own spirit-given form. He could feel the strain it took to maintain it, a steady drain on his stamina, a low thrum of pressure behind his temples. He held it for 10 seconds before it wavered, flickered violently, and extinguished itself, leaving a phantom warmth and a puff of what looked like golden dust that dissolved in the sea breeze. Izuku collapsed backward onto the sand, panting as if he'd just finished a sprint. A dull headache was already blooming, but it was drowned out by a wave of triumphant elation. I did it, he whispered, a wide, shaky grin spreading across his face. You did, my boy, Toshinori said, his own smile wide and genuine. You forged your first light. That night, Izuku didn't sleep. The elation from his success was a potent stimulant, his mind racing a mile a minute. He sat at his desk, the familiar glow of his desk lamp illuminating a brand new, pristine notebook. The cover was blank, waiting. With a sense of ceremony, he took a black marker and wrote the title in his neat, precise handwriting. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, and underneath, in slightly larger letters, Project the Luminforge. He stared at the words. Luminforge. It had come to him on the walk home, a name that felt right. Lumen for light. Forge for creation. He wasn't just emitting light, he was shaping it, giving it substance. He was a smith, and light was his raw material. He flipped to the first page and began to write, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the quiet room. His muttering, a habit he could never quite shake, began as a low hum. Okay, initial analysis. Quirk, or quirk-like phenomenon, tentatively named the Luminforge. Activation seems tied to a specific emotional and volitional state, not just any strong emotion, but a focused, protective will. The desire to shield, to guard, to stand between someone and harm. Hypothesis. The stronger and more focused the protective will, the more powerful the output. This corresponds with the initial event. The peak of desperation and protective instinct for Kaken resulted in a massive, powerful wave. My attempt tonight, a more controlled and focused desire to protect All Might, resulted in a small, controlled flame of light. This suggests a direct correlation between emotional intensity and energy output. He paused, tapping his chin. The cost. The drain is significant. The large wave caused near total exhaustion and a brief blackout. The small flame resulted in fatigue equivalent to a 50-meter dash and a mild headache. The energy source is clearly internal. My own stamina? Life force? Needs more data. But it confirms All Might's theory. A stronger body, more stamina, means a larger fuel tank. The training isn't just supplementary, it's essential. He started a new section, Known Applications Construct Nomenclature. The power creates tangible constructs of hard light. The initial event created a kinetic force wave. Is that a specific construct or just a raw output of uncontrolled energy? Unclear. Let's focus on what I can reasonably train. The primary function seems to be defensive, based on the activation trigger. He drew a neat sketch of a shield. 1. Aegis ** a defensive construct. A shield of solid light. The name is from Greek mythology, the legendary shield of Zeus and Athena. It feels appropriate. Variable in size and shape. Goal: create an Aegis strong enough to withstand physical impact. Current level: non-existent. Theoretical potential: high. His mind raced back to the incident. He hadn't consciously created the wave. But what if he could? What if he could create other things? Not just walls, but tools. He sketched a simple, pointed rod. 2. Lance ** a simple offensive construct. A spear or piercing rod of light. Less about raw damage and more about precision. Could be used for puncturing, disabling, or creating openings. It's the simplest form of directed force I can imagine. It's not a sword. A sword is for fighting, for clashing. A lance is for a single, focused thrust. It feels more precise, more in line with my way of thinking. Current level: theoretical. Then he thought about the UA exam. He couldn't just smash robots. He'd have to be smarter. What if he could use the light to move? He drew a flat, square platform. 3. Platform ** a utilitarian construct. A flat plane of light capable of bearing weight. Could be used for footholds, bridges, elevating allies, or blocking paths. This could be the most versatile application in a support or rescue context. Immense strategic potential. Current level: theoretical. He stared at the three concepts: Aegis, lance, platform. Shield, spear, foothold. Protection, precision, and utility. It wasn't the toolkit of a brawler like All Might. It was the toolkit of a guardian, a strategist. A lightsmith. He added one final section at the bottom of the page, titled Known Weaknesses. * high stamina cost * directly proportional to construct size/density. Overuse leads to exhaustion, headaches, and potential loss of consciousness. * requires intense focus. * Maintaining a construct requires constant mental effort. A lapse in concentration could cause it to flicker or shatter. Distractions are a major liability. * Emotional volatility. * The power source is also a weakness. Panic or loss of control could lead to unpredictable, potentially dangerous energy releases. Conversely, a loss of confidence or willpower could render the quirk useless at a critical moment. He put his pen down, his hand aching. He looked at the page, a blueprint for his own soul. For the first time in his life, his analytical mind wasn't focused on deconstructing the powers of others, but on building his own. A terrifying, exhilarating new chapter had begun. The months crawled by, measured in cleared sections of the beach and inches of new muscle on Izuku's frame. The training settled into a dual routine. Days were for the body, for the grueling physical labor that was slowly transforming him. The trash pile, once an insurmountable mountain range, was now visibly shrinking into disconnected hills. He could now carry a refrigerator on his back, a feat that had seemed godlike only a few months ago. Evenings were for the soul, for the quiet, focused work in the hidden cove. His control over the Luminforge grew at a glacial pace. After weeks of effort, he could summon the light on command, no longer needing to dive deep into traumatic memories. He learned to anchor the feeling of protectiveness not to a person, but to the abstract idea of being a shield. His first successful construct was an Aegis. It was the size of a dinner plate, a shimmering, translucent disk of gold that hovered in front of his hand. It hummed with contained energy, its surface etched with a faint, shifting honeycomb pattern. He was so proud of it he almost cried. "All right, my boy. Hold it steady," Toshinori said, a glint in his eye. "Let's see what it's made of." "Ready!" Izuku said, gritting his teeth and pouring his will into the shield. He imagined it as an unbreakable wall, a fortress gate. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, simply reached out and tapped it. It was a gentle motion, a light poke with a single bony finger. The Aegis shattered. It didn't break like glass. It dissolved with a discordant chime, a sound like 1,000 tiny crystals breaking at once, and collapsed into a shower of harmless golden motes. The feedback was instantaneous and jarring. It felt like a string had been snapped in his mind, and the resulting headache was sharp and immediate. Izuku stumbled back, clutching his head. He looked up, his face a mask of disappointment. It broke. I focused so hard, but it held, Tashinori said, his voice firm but kind. Izuku looked at him, confused. For the instant my finger made contact, it held. It didn't just pass through. It resisted. That is a victory, young Midoriya. It's a tiny victory, but it is infinitely more than you had yesterday. Tomorrow, we'll see if you can make it hold for 2 seconds. Then a week from now, maybe it can withstand a stronger tap. This is how heroes are built. Not in one grand explosion, but through a million tiny victories. Izuku stared at his empty hand, then back at his mentor. The disappointment slowly receded, replaced by a fresh wave of determination. All Might was right. This was just the beginning. Every failure was just data for the next attempt. 9 months into the 10-month training plan, Izuku Midoriya was almost unrecognizable. The scrawny, perpetually hunched kid was gone. He now stood taller, his shoulders broader, lean, hard-earned muscle defined his frame. He wasn't bulky, but he looked solid, wiry, like a runner or a swimmer. The perpetual tremor of anxiety in his limbs had been replaced by a quiet stillness. His eyes, once wide and fearful, now held a calm, focused intensity. The change wasn't just physical. He walked with a purpose he'd never had before. His dream was no longer a fragile, far-off fantasy. It was a construction project, and he was laying the foundation one brick at a time. He was walking home from his last day of classes at Aldera Junior High, the familiar yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, when a voice cut through the afternoon chatter. "Oh, Deku!" Izuku stopped. The voice was like a ghost from a past life, a life of powerlessness and shame he was actively working to leave behind. He turned slowly. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his uniform immaculate as always. He had grown taller too, and his explosive presence seemed to fill the entire street. For months, they had existed in a strange truce. Bakugo had stopped his overt bullying, content to ignore Izuku entirely, treating him like a piece of furniture. But Izuku could always feel his eyes on him, studying him during lunch, watching him in the hallways. He could feel the simmering, unanswered questions. Now, it seemed, the truce was over. Bakugo's crimson eyes raked over Izuku, taking in the change in his physique. The change he had been observing from a distance for months. A sneer twisted his lips. "So you've been working out," Bakugo stated, his tone dripping with derision. "Running around, lifting weights. All for that pathetic little light show you pulled in the alley. You really think that makes you hot shit?" The Izuku of 9 months ago would have flinched. He would have stammered, apologized, and tried to make himself as small as possible. This Izuku simply stood his ground, his expression unreadable. "What's the deal?" Bakugo pressed, taking a step closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Are you gonna finally admit it? That you've had a quirk all this time? That you've been looking down on me, laughing at me behind my back for my entire damn life?" The accusation was so far from the truth it was almost absurd. But Izuku could see the genuine, paranoid anger in Bakugo's eyes. His worldview, where he was at the top and Deku was at the absolute bottom, had been fundamentally challenged. He was trying to force reality back into a shape he understood. "No, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. There was no stutter, no fear. Just a simple statement of fact. "I haven't been lying to you." The lack of fear seemed to infuriate Bakugo more than anything else. He was used to making Izuku tremble. This calm defiance was new. It was insulting. "Then what was it?" he snarled, small, angry pops crackling in his palms. "Miracles don't just happen. You did something. Stop pretending to be some useless nobody." Useless nobody. The words that used to be his brand, the label that had defined him. He heard them now, and they were just noise. They had no power over him anymore. His worth wasn't determined by Kaken's opinion. It was being forged every single day on a beach of scrap metal and every single night in a cove filled with golden light. His worth was being built by the faith of the number one hero. Izuku looked his childhood friend in the eye, and for the first time, he didn't see a monster or a bully. He saw an angry, confused kid who was terrified of being surpassed, terrified of the world not making sense. He felt a brief, surprising pang of something akin to pity. He didn't need to fight him. He didn't need to convince him. He just needed to move forward. "I'm applying to UA," Izuku said, changing the subject completely. Bakugo blinked, thrown off balance. "What? Of course you are, you stalker. You think I didn't know that? I'm going to get in," Izuku continued, his voice still level, still calm. "And I'm going to become a hero." Bakugo let out a harsh, barking laugh. "With what? That one-trick light show? Are you gonna try to blind villains to death? You can't fight. You don't have an ounce of killer instinct. You're still the same useless, crying Deku you've always been, no matter how many weights you lift." Izuku didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply offered a small, sad smile. He adjusted the strap of his backpack on his shoulder. "I'm going to try, Kaken." He then turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. He left Bakugo standing in the middle of the sidewalk, crackling with impotent rage. That simple statement, "I'm going to try," was more devastating to Bakugo than any insult or challenge Izuku could have ever uttered. It was a declaration of independence. It meant that Izuku's journey was no longer about him. It meant Bakugo was no longer the main character in Izuku Midoriya's story. As Izuku walked, he could feel the familiar thrum of anger radiating from behind him, but for the first time, it didn't make his skin crawl. It was just the sound of the past, fading into the distance. He looked at his hands, the calluses thick and tough. He could almost feel the phantom warmth of the light, waiting to be called. The UA entrance exam was just a few weeks away. He had no idea if his power was good enough. It wasn't destructive. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet, defensive, and exhausting. He couldn't punch a robot. He couldn't blast it apart, but he could protect. He could endure. He could think. A new kind of confidence, fragile but real, settled in his heart. He wouldn't get into UA the same way Kaken would. He wouldn't get in the same way All Might would have. He would have to pass the test his own way. As a lightsmith. Chapter 3. The Guardian at the Gate. The air at the UA High Entrance exam hummed with a unique frequency. A thrumming chord composed of equal parts crippling anxiety and incandescent ambition. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of Japan's premier hero academy, a single face in a sea of thousands. He was surrounded by a living encyclopedia of quirks, kids with engine-powered legs, girls with crystalline skin, boys who crackled with latent energy. For a fleeting moment, the old Izuku, the quirkless, powerless Deku, threatened to surface, whispering insidious doubts into his ear. You don't belong here. You're an imposter. He silenced the voice with a slow, centering breath. He felt the solid ground beneath his feet, the well-worn strap of his backpack in his hand, and the thrum of hard-earned muscle in his legs. 10 months of hauling scrap metal had forged a body that no longer felt like a liability. 10 months of quiet meditation in a hidden cove had forged a will that no longer shattered at the first sign of pressure. All Might's voice echoed in his memory, a steadfast beacon, You are not them, young Midoriya. You do not need to be. Show them what a guardian can do. He squared his shoulders. He belonged here. He had earned his place at this starting line just as much as anyone else. The first trial was not a battlefield, but a cavernous auditorium, silent save for the rustle of paper and the scratching of pencils. The written exam. As President Mick's booming voice faded from the orientation, a profound calm settled over Izuku. This was his territory. The questions were a complex tapestry of logic puzzles, advanced mathematics, literary analysis, and situational ethics. Question 37. A villain with a teleportation quirk is holding a hostage on a collapsing bridge. The villain can only teleport themselves. If you sever the northern support cable, the hostage will fall into the river below, a 90% chance of survival with rescue hero response time. But the villain will be trapped and apprehended. If you do nothing, there is a 40% chance the entire structure fails, likely killing them both. What is your course of action and why? Izuku's pen flew across the paper. He didn't just answer, he analyzed. He calculated fall velocities, listed potential rescue quirks best suited for water retrieval, and proposed a third option involving a hero with a vibration-dampening quirk to stabilize the bridge temporarily, creating a new window of opportunity. He poured the same meticulous, obsessive detail into these answers as he did into his hero notebooks. For him, solving a complex ethical dilemma felt strangely similar to forging a light construct. Both required intense focus, a clear understanding of the components, and the will to build something cohesive and strong out of disparate elements. He was building an argument, a fortress of logic. He finished with 20 minutes to spare, a quiet sense of confidence blooming in his chest. He had cleared the first hurdle not with power, but with his mind. It was a small victory, but it was his. The true test, however, lay beyond. The practical exam. The examinees were herded into a massive waiting area in front of Battle Center B, a sprawling, full-scale replica of a city. The air was thick with nervous energy, kids stretching, boasting, or psyching themselves up. Izuku felt a fresh wave of anxiety, this one colder and sharper. His mind was an asset, but here, in this concrete jungle, action was king. The lights dimmed, and President Mick's face appeared on a gargantuan screen. All right, listen up, examinee listeners. Here's the deal. You've got 10 minutes to go wild in our super hip urban setting. Your goal is to rack up points by taking down our custom-built villains. Images of 3 distinct robot types flashed on screen, each designated with a point value. 1 pointers were small and agile. 2 pointers were tank-like and formidable. 3 pointers were tall, heavily armed behemoths. Izuku's mind went into overdrive, his muttering starting up without his permission. Okay, so a tiered point system. The 3 pointers are the high-value targets, but they'll draw the most competition and have the strongest defenses. An Aegis construct might not hold against their cannon fire unless I can make it incredibly dense, but the stamina cost would be huge. The 1 pointers are fast. A lance construct might be too slow to aim. Maybe I could use platforms to corral them. And what's this? A sharp, indignant voice cut through his muttering. Are you attempting to distract the other applicants? Such behavior is unbecoming of a potential UE student. Izuku jumped, turning to see the tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses who had called him out during the briefing. Tenya Ida? Sorry! Izuku squeaked, clamping his mouth shut. Before Ida could continue his lecture, President Mick's voice boomed again. And one last thing, listeners! The 4th villain type is worth 0 points. It's an arena trap. A gimmick. Think of it as a giant, walking obstacle. My advice? Avoid it at all costs. An image of a colossal robot, towering over the city buildings, filled the screen. A wave of nervous murmurs swept through the crowd. Izuku stared at the screen, his analytical mind latching onto a different detail. He remembered the fine print in the exam booklet. Acts of heroism, including but not limited to the rescue and defense of other examinees, may be rewarded with a separate point category. Rescue points. The path forward solidified in his mind. It was a narrow, uncertain path, but it was his. He wasn't a hunter. He wasn't here to rack up a kill count. He was a guardian. His test wasn't about how many robots he could break, but how many people he could protect. Right, let's get this party started. President Mike screamed. Go! Silence. Everyone looked around, confused. What are you waiting for? The test has begun. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Go, go, go! The spell was broken. With a collective roar, the students surged forward, a tidal wave of adolescent ambition flooding into the fake city. Izuku was swept along with them for a few paces before he slowed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air was immediately filled with the sounds of chaos. Explosions, the screech of metal, the crackle of electricity. A boy with laser fingers disintegrated a 1-pointer. A girl with powerful, rabbit-like legs kicked a 2-pointer's head clean off. It was overwhelming. Raw, destructive power was everywhere. He felt small, out of place, a candle in a hurricane. Asterisk, can I really do this? My power doesn't break things. Asterisk. A deafening boom echoed from a nearby street, followed by a familiar, furious roar. Get out of my way, extras! Shrapnel from one of Bakugo's detonations arced through the air, spinning toward a dark-haired girl who was concentrating on pulling another robot apart with what looked like vine-like hair. She was completely oblivious to the danger. There was no time to think. Izuku's training took over. He threw his hand forward, his mind focusing on a single, clear intent. Shield, a disk of golden light, the size of a manhole cover, snapped into existence a foot in front of the girl. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency, its surface a perfect, shimmering honeycomb of energy. The jagged piece of metal, spinning fast enough to kill, struck the aegis with a sharp, metallic clink. It didn't crack. It didn't even waver. The shrapnel, its momentum completely arrested, fell harmlessly to the ground. The girl, Ibra Shiozaki, startled by the sound, turned and saw the golden shield dissolving into a gentle shower of light motes. She looked back at Izuku, who was standing 20 feet away, his arms still outstretched, a flicker of surprise and gratitude in her eyes before she returned to her fight. Izuku lowered his arm, a sharp but manageable throb of a headache beginning behind his eyes. He had done it. It worked. And deep in the back of his mind, he felt a faint, almost imperceptible ping, a mental notification. Rescue assist, 10 points. A grin, wild and sharp, split his face. It was real. His path was real. He broke into a run, not towards the sounds of fighting, but parallel to them. He became a ghost, a support operative flitting through the alleyways. His eyes weren't scanning for targets, but for trouble. He rounded a corner to see a boy with a multi-limbed tail quirk, Mashireo Ojiro, fending off 3 one-pointers in a narrow corridor. He was skilled, but they had him pinned, their laser cannons charging. Hey! Up here! Izuku yelled. Ojiro glanced up. Izuku, concentrating hard, thrust his palm towards the wall above the robots. A flat, glowing square of light, a platform, materialized against the brickwork. It was only 3 feet by 3 feet, but it was solid. Ojiro understood instantly. He used his tail as a springboard, launching himself off the ground, ricocheting off the opposite wall, and landing squarely on the golden platform. From his new vantage point he dropped down behind the robots, his tail sweeping their legs out from under them in a single, powerful move. Asterisk rescue assist, 5 points. Rescue assist, 5 points. Rescue assist, 5 points. Asterisk, the headache intensified. The drain on his stamina was like a leaky faucet, a constant, steady drip. But the mental pings of the rescue points were a potent fuel. He was doing it. He was being a hero without throwing a single punch. His strategy evolved. He became a battlefield controller. He would throw up a waist-high Aegis barrier in an alley, forcing robots into a choke point where a long-range quirk user could pick them off. He would create a series of platform steps for a shorter examinee to reach a high-up 2-pointer. He was everywhere and nowhere, a golden flicker in the periphery, his presence felt but rarely seen. He was a force multiplier, making the other examinees better, safer, more effective. But he knew rescue points alone might not be enough. He needed to prove he could handle a threat on his own, even a minor one. He spotted a lone one-pointer, its patrol route taking it away from the main skirmishes. This was his chance. He ducked behind a car, his breathing ragged. He was starting to feel the fatigue deep in his bones. Precision, not power, he told himself, recalling his notes. He held out his hand, palm up, and concentrated. He pictured a needle, sharp and thin. A thin rod of golden light, no thicker than his thumb and about 2 feet long, slowly extruded from his palm. A lance. It wavered slightly, the effort of maintaining it solid, piercing form more taxing than a flat shield. He waited for the robot to pass his position. Its knee joint, a mess of exposed hydraulics and unarmored wiring, was his target. He took a deep breath, pouring a surge of will into the construct. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he didn't throw the lance, he willed it forward. It shot through the air, silent and swift, and struck the robot's knee with a sharp hiss. The light construct, driven by pure focused intent, punched straight through the weaker metal and severed the main hydraulic line. The robot seized, its leg locking up, and it pitched forward, crashing to the ground with a pathetic screech before its power light went out. Villain Point 1. Izuku let out a shaky breath, leaning against the car for support. The headache was now a persistent, angry drumming. He had scored 1 point. Bakugo had probably scored 40 by now, but that single point felt like a mountain. It was a point he had earned on his own terms, with his intellect and his unique power. He managed to repeat the process twice more on isolated targets before the rumbling started. It began as a low tremor in the soles of his shoes, a vibration that grew until the concrete itself seemed to moan. A collective gasp rose from the examinees across the battle center. The noise of fighting died down, replaced by a sudden, fearful silence. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. The zero-pointer. The screen had not done it justice. It was a monster of metal and wiring, a titan that dwarfed the 10-story buildings it was now casually walking through. Its single, glowing red eye swept across the cityscape, an indifferent god of destruction. "That's the zero-pointer!" Someone screamed. The spell of silence broke, and the panic began. Everyone ran. It was a primal, instinctual flight response. Heroes don't fight kaiju. They evacuate. Izuku ran too, his heart hammering in his chest, his training screaming at him to survive, to get away from the no-win scenario. He was fast now, his 10 months of training paying off as he sprinted down the street, not daring to look back. Then he heard it. A cry. "Ow! Help!" The sound cut through his fear like a knife. He skidded to a halt, his sneakers squealing on the pavement. He looked back, his eyes scanning the path of destruction the zero-pointer was leaving in its wake. There, not 20 yards from the robot's path, was a girl with a brown bob cut, the friendly-looking girl he'd seen earlier. She was pinned, her leg trapped beneath a huge slab of concrete from a building the zero-pointer had clipped. It was Ochako Uraraka. Her face was pale with terror, her eyes wide as she looked from her trapped leg to the colossal, advancing machine. She was trying to use her quirk, touching the debris to make it float, but she was in too much pain, too panicked. It wasn't working. The zero-pointer raised its fist, a wrecking ball the size of a small house. It wasn't aiming for her. It was just moving, and she was in the way. Its path of destruction was indiscriminate. The world went silent for Izuku. The fleeing students, the distant sirens, the groaning of stressed metal, it all faded away. There was only the girl, the robot, and the space between them. "I have to save her." The imperative was absolute, the same soul-deep command that had awoken his power in the alleyway. But this time, it wasn't laced with frantic, helpless terror. It was cold. It was clear. It was a mission. He turned and ran, not away from the robot, but towards it. Towards her. "Hey! What are you doing, you idiot?" A fleeing examinee yelled at him. He didn't hear. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Not enough time to lift the rubble. He wasn't strong enough anyway. No time to try and disable the robot. It was too big, too powerful. There was only one option. One path. Not to attack the threat, but to shield the objective. He reached her side in a few frantic heartbeats. "Don't worry!" he yelled, his voice strained but steady. "I've got you!" She stared up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "But how?" He didn't answer. He planted his feet between her and the descending fist, his legs spread in a low, solid stance. He was an anchor. He was a wall. He looked up at the shadow that was about to consume them, and he felt no fear. Only purpose. He poured every ounce of his will, every drop of his remaining stamina, every fiber of his being into one, single, monumental act of creation. Aegis Major, he screamed, a raw, primal sound torn from the depths of his soul, and light erupted from him. It didn't just flash into existence. It was forged. A lattice of brilliant gold exploded from his outstretched hands, weaving itself into a complex geometric pattern. A second layer snapped into place behind it, then a third, and a fourth, each one an interlocking honeycomb of pure force. In less than a second, a colossal, multi-layered shield of solid light, easily 50 feet wide, materialized in the air above them. It was angled like a rampart, a beautiful, impossible thing, like a cathedral's stained glass window depicting a sunrise, built to defy a god. The world held its breath. Then came the impact. It wasn't a crash. It was a cataclysm. A deafening, soul-shaking krathom that was felt more than it was heard. The ground shook violently. The sound of a world breaking. The robot's fist, a mountain of steel and pistons, ground against the golden shield. The Aegis Major groaned, an unearthly sound of pure energy under impossible strain. Cracks, blazing with white-hot light, spiderwebbed across its surface. It was holding. It was holding, but it was breaking. The feedback hit Izuku like a physical blow. A psychic shockwave traveled down the construct of his will and slammed into his mind. The world went white. The drumming headache wasn't a drum anymore. It was a supernova detonating behind his eyes. Blood, hot and thick, gushed from his nose. A scream of pure, undiluted agony was ripped from his lungs, a sound that was barely human. He felt like his very consciousness was being torn apart. But he did not let go. He poured more will into the cracks, his entire being focused on a single thought. Hold. It must hold. For 2 eternal seconds, the irresistible force met the immovable will. Then, the robot's arm, its motion complete, began to retract. The pressure vanished. The Aegis Major, its purpose served, held its form for one more glorious instant before it finally gave way. It didn't shatter into pieces. It dissolved into a silent, swirling galaxy of a billion golden motes of light that rained down gently over the street, bathing the scene in a soft, ethereal glow before fading into nothing. The release of tension was as violent as the impact. The psychic backlash threw Izuku backward like a ragdoll. His body, completely spent, flew 10 feet through the air before landing in a crumpled heap on the asphalt. His vision tunneled, the edges turning black. The last thing he saw was Uraraka's face, her expression of terror replaced by one of absolute, stunned awe. The last thing he heard was the blare of a klaxon, sharp and final, signaling the end of the exam. Then, the darkness took him completely. In a darkened room deep within Yue's central tower, a wall of screens displayed every angle of Battle Center B. The assembled teachers, Aizawa, Present Mike, Midnight, Ectoplasm, and others, were frozen in stunned silence. The chaotic noise of Present Mike's commentary had died the moment the green-haired boy had turned back. Did you see that? Present Mike whispered, his voice stripped of all its usual bravado. Midnight had her hand over her mouth. He blocked it. He blocked the zero-pointer. Shota Aizawa leaned forward in his chair, his usual bored expression replaced by one of sharp, analytical intensity. He had been watching Examinee 7111. He'd seen the support work, the clever use of platforms and shields. He had mentally tagged the boy as having high intelligence and strategic acumen, but probably lacking the combat prowess necessary for the hero course. A good candidate for general studies, perhaps. Then he had watched the boy run towards the arena trap. He'd scoffed. Another reckless fool. But what he had witnessed wasn't reckless. It was insane. It was illogical. It was an act of such pure, selfless, suicidal heroism that it defied categorization. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't tried to fight. He had planted himself in the path of oblivion to shield someone else. The sheer force of what required to manifest a construct of that magnitude, to hold it against that level of force, it was monstrous. It wasn't the power of a fighter. It was the power of a martyr, and it was utterly fascinating. At the center of the observation deck, sitting in a high-backed chair, Principal Nises stared at the main screen, which was frozen on the image of the golden shield at the moment of impact. He had seen generations of students, thousands of quirks, every flavor of power imaginable. He had seen raw strength, incredible speed, and brilliant intellect. But this was different. This was a child who, when faced with an insurmountable obstacle, did not try to destroy it. He did not try to go around it. He chose to become an unbreakable shield to protect what was behind it. In a world that increasingly valued destructive power, the biggest punch, the flashiest explosion, this was a fundamental paradigm shift. It was the philosophy of a guardian, not a warrior. A builder, not a demolisher. A slow smile spread across the principal's furry face, his black eyes glinting with profound interest. Well now, Niza said, his cheerful voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. He took a sip of his tea. It seems we've found something quite rare. He steepled his paws, his gaze fixed on the unconscious form of Izuku Midoriya lying amidst the fading golden light. That, gentlemen, ladies, he declared to the room, is a different kind of strength entirely. #### Chapter 4. Potential of a different kind. The world swam back into focus with agonizing slowness. At first, there was only a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from the very center of his skull. A persistent and unwelcome roommate who had moved in and started rearranging the furniture. Then came the smell, antiseptic and clean, a sterile scent that was the polar opposite of the dust and ozone of the battle center. Finally, he registered a gentle, rhythmic beeping somewhere to his left. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was white and unfamiliar. He was lying in a bed with crisp, stiff sheets. And 4-line was taped to the back of his hand, snaking its way to a bag of clear fluid. He was in an infirmary. He was alive. "Oh, you're awake, dearie!" A kind, matronly voice pulled his attention. He turned his head, a move that sent a fresh spike of pain through his temples, and saw a short, elderly woman in a doctor's coat. She was pulling a curtain closed around his bed, her gray hair tied up in a tight bun. It was Recovery Girl, Yue's legendary healing hero. "Easy now," she said, her lips pursed in a gentle frown. "You gave us all quite a scare. You completely bottomed out your stamina. It's a miracle you didn't do any permanent damage to yourself." She leaned in and gave his forehead a soft, wet kiss. A wave of profound weariness washed over him as her quirk activated, accelerating his body's natural healing by consuming his remaining energy. The sharp edges of his headache softened into a dull, manageable throb. "The exam," Izuku croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. "You pass," a new voice said, deep and familiar. Izuku's head snapped towards the foot of the bed. His heart leaped into his throat. There, standing with a quiet, proud smile on his skeletal face, was Toshinori Yagi. "All might!" Izuku tried to sit up, a move his aching body immediately protested. "Stay put, my boy," Toshinori said, holding up a hand. He glanced at Recovery Girl, who gave a small nod and shuffled away to give them some privacy. "She knows about me," he explained quietly. "She's one of the few who does. She's the one who's been patching me up for years." He pulled a small stool over and sat down, his blue eyes bright with an emotion Izuku couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of pride, relief, and something else. "I watched the whole thing from the observation room," Toshinori said, his voice low. "Young Midoriya, what you did, it was magnificent. Utterly reckless, completely insane, but magnificent." Izuku's cheeks flushed. I just did what I had to do. The girl, Uraraka-san, she was trapped. You did more than that," Toshinori interrupted, his gaze intense. "You didn't just save her. You showed them all, the teachers, the other students, you showed them a kind of heroism that isn't measured in villain points. You embodied the very core of what it means to be a hero, selfless, protective sacrifice." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, projector-like device. He clicked a button, and a holographic letter shimmered into existence in the air above Izuku's lap. It was his Yui acceptance letter. Toshinori's voice took on the booming, heroic cadence of All Might. "Izuku Midoriya, you scored a respectable 3 villain points. However, that was not the whole story. For your constant and effective protection of other examinees, and for the single most incredible act of selfless defense the judges have ever witnessed, you have been awarded 70 rescue points." The hologram shifted, showing a breakdown. Izuku's name was high up on the list, even above Bakugo's, who had racked up a staggering 77 villain points but 0 rescue points. "You passed with flying colors, my boy," Toshinori said, his voice returning to its normal, gentle tone. "Welcome to your hero academia." Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and immediate. He had done it. Against all odds, against all logic, he had made it. The dream that had been shattered on a rooftop 10 months ago was now a tangible reality. All the pain, the exhaustion, the endless days of hauling trash, the mind-numbing headaches from forging light, it was all worth it. Thank you, Izuku whispered, the words choked with emotion. Thank you for believing in me. Toshinori's smile softened. I didn't give you this, young Midoriya. You earned it. Your power, your mind, your spirit, they are all your own. I just helped you clear the rust off. He stood up, placing a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. Now get some rest. Your first day of school is in a week. That's when the real work begins. The first day at UA was a whirlwind of surreal experiences. Finding his classroom, the colossal door of Class 1A practically screaming, "Heroes are larger than life," was an adventure in itself. He was so nervous his palms were sweating, his carefully prepared mental scripts for introducing himself forgotten. He opened the door to find Ida and Bakugo already in a confrontation, a scene so perfectly normal it was almost calming. Then, he was spotted by the girl he had saved. "Oh, you're here!" Ochako Uraraka beamed, her cheeks rosy. "The plain-looking boy with the amazing light power! I tried to talk to the judges about giving you some of my points, but they said it wasn't necessary. That shield was just, wow! It was incredible." Her genuine, bubbly enthusiasm was disarming. Izuku, flustered and blushing, could only stammer a response before a new figure appeared behind them. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." The voice was a monotone drawl, dripping with exhaustion and apathy. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade lay on the floor behind Uraraka, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a miserable caterpillar. He unzipped himself and rose, revealing a disheveled man with dark, tired eyes and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. Shota Aizawa, the underground hero Eraserhead. Izuku's inner fanboy went into overdrive, but he managed to suppress it. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa," he said, his voice flat. "Put these on and meet me on the training grounds." He tossed a bundle of UA gym uniforms onto his desk. "We're having a quirk apprehension test." A collective wave of confusion and protest rose from the class. "But what about orientation? The welcome ceremony?" Uraraka asked. "UA isn't a normal school," Aizawa stated, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and dismissive. "We don't have time for pointless pleasantries. You're here to become heroes, and that training starts now." His eyes, dark and penetrating, lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. A flicker of something, skepticism, curiosity, a challenge, passed through them before he turned and walked out. On the training grounds, the reality of Aizawa's threat sank in. "You've been doing these kinds of physical assessments since middle school," Aizawa said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "But you were never allowed to use your quirks. Today you will." "Bakugo," he singled out Katsuki. "You got the highest score in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk," Aizawa said, tossing him a ball. Bakugo grinned, a feral, predatory expression. He wound up, and with a deafening roar of "D-I-E-E!" he slammed the ball with an explosion, launching it into the stratosphere. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum. It's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excited chatter. This was going to be fun. This was going to be awesome. "Fun, you say?" Aizawa's voice dropped, and the temperature on the field seemed to plummet. "You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points for these 8 tests will be judged as having no potential, and will be expelled immediately." The excitement died, replaced by a thick, heavy dread. This wasn't a game. This was a culling. Izuku felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach. His quirk wasn't suited for this. It wasn't about raw physical enhancement. How was he supposed to compete with kids who could literally fly or create explosions? He could feel Aizawa's gaze on him, heavy and judgmental. He had read Izuku's file, * quirk, unregistered, possible emissions/creation type. Manifestation event, UA entrance exam. * Aizawa was the ultimate pragmatist. He saw a one-trick pony, a kid who had a single, spectacular moment but likely had zero practical, day-to-day utility. He was here to prove it. The first test, a 50-meter dash. Ida went first, his leg engines roaring, clearing the distance in 3.04 seconds. Bakugo used small, controlled explosions to propel himself forward, finishing in 4.13 seconds. Uraraka touched her clothes and shoes, making herself lighter, and got a respectable 7.15. Then it was Izuku's turn. He stood at the starting line, his heart pounding. He couldn't run faster. But he could change the path. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. Asterisk short bursts. Minimalist constructs. Efficiency is key. Asterisk. The starting pistol fired. For his first step he ran. For his second, he thrust his hand forward and down. A small, angled platform of golden light, no bigger than his foot, snapped into existence a few inches above the ground. He pushed off it like a springboard, the light construct shattering into motes the instant his foot left it. He was already creating the next one before his first foot landed. Asterisk step. Forge. Launch. Shatter. Step. Forge. Launch. Shatter. Asterisk. It wasn't running. It was a rhythmic, bounding sequence of controlled leaps. He was literally paving his own road through the air, a path that existed only for a fraction of a second at a time. He crossed the finish line, panting, a dull throb already starting behind his eyes. Aizawa's device beeped. 5.51 seconds. It wasn't a spectacular score, but it was far better than his quirkless time would have been. He had taken a test designed to measure raw speed and turned it into a test of creation speed and strategic placement. Ida looked at him with renewed interest, his engineering mind clearly intrigued by the unorthodox method. Aizawa's expression remained unreadable, but he made a small note on his data pad. The next tests were a similar story of creative, and sometimes clumsy, adaptation. The grip strength test. The machine was designed to measure raw physical power. Izuku gripped the device, and with his other hand, he began to forge. He didn't create a separate construct, he tried something new. He imagined the light not as an external object, but as an extension of his own body, an exoskeleton of force. A glowing, golden gauntlet of energy formed around his hand and forearm, humming with power. He squeezed. The device's screen shot up, passing his physical limit, climbing higher and higher before stopping at a respectable, but not record-breaking, 110 kilograms. The light gauntlet flickered and died, and the feedback was sharp, making his arm feel numb and tingly. It was a less efficient use of his power, he noted mentally, but a useful application for augmenting his own actions. More data for the notebook. Standing long jump? He launched himself with a powerful platform. Sideways jumps? A rapid-fire sequence of small, ricocheting Aegis shields he could bounce between. In every test, he was forced to think, to analyze, to adapt his limited toolkit to the problem at hand. He was surviving, staying firmly in the middle of the pack, but he knew the final test was the one that mattered most. The ball throw. It was the test that had set the tone, the one where Bakugo had demonstrated the sheer, overwhelming power of his quirk. Aizawa called his name. Izuku walked to the circle, the weighted ball feeling heavy in his hand. He could feel every eye on him. This was the test where brute force was the only obvious answer. And he didn't have any. He couldn't infuse the ball with light. He couldn't create an explosion. He couldn't make it lighter. He stood in the circle, his mind a frantic storm of calculations and rejected ideas. He could try the gauntlet again, but the added strength would be marginal. It wouldn't be enough. He was going to fail. He was going to come in last. Expulsion. The word echoed in his mind, cold and final. He looked over at Aizawa. The teacher's eyes were narrowed, his expression bored, but it was a predatory boredom. It was the look of a man waiting for his prediction to be proven correct. Asterisk. I knew it. He's just a one-trick pony. All defense, no application. Asterisk. That look, that utter dismissal of his potential, stirred something in Izuku. It wasn't anger. It was defiance. A cold, hard resolve coalesced in his gut. Asterisk. You think my power is just for blocking? You think my mind is useless unless I'm analyzing someone else? I am a forger. I don't just build walls. I build tools. He stopped. The frantic energy in his mind stilled, replaced by a laser-like focus. A new idea, audacious and complex, snapped into place. It was a huge risk. The construct would be more intricate than anything he had ever attempted. The stamina cost would be immense, and if his focus wavered for even a second, the entire thing would collapse into a useless shower of light. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He held the ball in his left hand and raised his right. He didn't rush. He took his time, building the image in his mind piece by piece. He imagined a long, grooved channel. A containment field. A series of accelerating rings. He wasn't just thinking of a shape, he was thinking of a function. He was building a machine out of light. Slowly, shimmering into existence in front of him, a construct began to form. It started as a simple half-pipe of gold, about 3 feet long, floating horizontally at waist height. Then, ethereal rings of light materialized around it, 5 of them, spaced evenly along its length. The air around the construct began to hum, the light shifting from a gentle gold to a more intense, almost white hue. It wasn't a club. It wasn't a catapult. It was a miniature, semi-portable, light-based railgun. A hush fell over the class. They stared, mesmerized and confused, at the impossible, glowing machine hanging in the air. Bakugo's jaw was slack with disbelief. Todoroki, who had remained aloof and indifferent all day, watched with a flicker of genuine curiosity. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly. His bored expression was gone, replaced by one of pure, undiluted shock. Izuku opened his eyes, his focus absolute. The headache was already a fierce, pounding drum, the effort of maintaining such a complex, multi-part construct immense. He carefully placed the soft ball into the back of the grooved channel. It rested there, held in place by a faint shimmer of energy. Okay, he whispered to himself, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Channel the force. Not a push. A controlled, sequential pulse. He gritted his teeth and poured his will into the machine. The rings of light began to glow in sequence, starting from the back. Fum, 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 fum. FOM, asterisk. Each ring pulsed with a wave of kinetic force, grabbing the ball and accelerating it down the channel. The final ring flashed with an almost blinding intensity. With a sound like a giant bullwhip cracking the sound barrier, a sharp, resonant snap of displaced air and energy, the softball was launched from the railgun. It was a blur, a white streak against the blue sky, leaving a faint trail of golden motes in its wake. It flew higher and farther than Bakugo's, climbing until it was just a speck before arcing back down far in the distance. The railgun construct, its purpose served, held for a moment longer before flickering violently and dissolving into a swirling cloud of light dust. The backlash was brutal. The world tilted sideways. The pounding in Izuku's head reached a crescendo, and his vision swam with black spots. His knees buckled, and he had to plant a hand on the ground to keep from collapsing. The entire test, from the 50-meter dash to now, had almost completely drained his tank. He looked up, panting, his vision slowly clearing. The entire class was staring at him in stunned silence. He had their attention. He looked at Aizawa. The teacher stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the spot in the sky where the ball had vanished. Then, slowly, he lowered his gaze to the device in his hand. He looked at the number. He looked back at Izuku. And then, for the first time that day, Shota Aizawa smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a feral, unsettling grin, all teeth, the grin of a predator that had just discovered a fascinating new species of prey. He held up the device for the class to see. The display read 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. Bakugo's face was a priceless mural of apoplectic rage and utter disbelief. He looked from the scoreboard to Izuku, his mind refusing to process how the useless, quirkless Deku had just outshone him with a glorified flashlight. How? Kaminari stammered. He didn't even touch it. He made a thing. That thing, Aizawa said, his voice now holding a sharp edge of respect, was an application of intellect. A solution to a problem. He walked over to Izuku, who was slowly pushing himself back to his feet, still swaying slightly. Aizawa loomed over him, his grin gone, replaced by his usual tired scrutiny, but the skepticism in his eyes was gone. The expulsion was a logical deception, he announced to the class, causing a collective sigh of relief. It was a means to draw out your full potential. He then turned his full attention back to Izuku. I was wrong about you, Midoriya. Izuku flinched, expecting a but. I saw your file. Aizawa continued, his voice low enough that only Izuku could hear. An unregistered quirk that manifested once, spectacularly, under extreme duress. I pegged you for a liability, a one-hit wonder whose only move was a suicidal defense. I thought your potential was zero. He gestured back towards the field. But this was different. You didn't just use your power. You analyzed the problem and engineered a solution. You think like a strategist, not a thug. Every single test, you found a new way to apply your limited abilities to overcome the obstacle. You weren't just throwing light around. You were forging tools. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his gaze piercing. You don't have zero potential, you just have a different kind. Raw power is useless without the mind to control it. You have the mind. Your challenge will be forging a body and a power strong enough to keep up with it. Don't waste it. It was the single greatest compliment Izuku had ever received. It wasn't praise for his heart, or for his spirit, or for some inherited power. It was validation for him. For his mind. For the years he had spent hunched over notebooks, analyzing, thinking, dreaming. Aizawa hadn't just seen his quirk. He had seen his intellect as his primary weapon. A wave of dizziness washed over Izuku, and he stumbled. Aizawa, surprisingly, caught his arm, his grip firm and steadying. Go see Recovery Girl, he ordered, his tone back to its usual flat gruffness. Tell her you overexerted yourself with a complex construct. She'll know what it means. As Izuku limped off the field, leaning heavily on Uraraka and Ida who had rushed to his side, he felt a new sense of belonging. He had been tested, judged, and found worthy, not because he was powerful in the way everyone else was, but because he was different. He was a thinker, a builder, a lightsmith. And in the eyes of the most critical and pragmatic teacher at UA, that was more than enough. He had found his place, not by trying to be like everyone else, but by embracing the very things that made him unique, and that felt like a bigger victory than any number on a scoreboard.